Okay, so we talked a little bit already about some of the limits of economic growth there in New Spain, the problem of less liquidity with more and more silver being exported from the colony. And so during the Bourbon reforms, you are going to see a major increase in population there in New Spain. The Native American population is going to increase, and the increase of Spaniards and mixed race people as well will occur in New Spain, okay, during the period of 1700 up through 1821 when you have independence from Spain. Now, normally, population increase is seen as a good thing for economic growth, right? You have more laborers, more people buying goods, but in the case of New Spain during the Bourbon reforms, it's actually not going to have much of an effect. Part of the reason for this is the fact that many people who are working as laborers there in New Spain were receiving very low wages. And so if their wages are low, and the prices of goods are actually increasing, which they were during that time, people are not going to be able to buy as many goods as they would be able to if they were receiving better wages. Okay, so even though you got a big population, they're not being utilized properly during this time because prices are rising, but wages remain low. Another problem that is limiting economic growth in New Spain is the land is not going to be quite as productive in terms of agriculture. The land is going to be stressed because the population has increased. All right, with more people, there's more demand for food, and so you're going to see more and more pressure being put on the land, the arable land, to grow more food to feed this bigger population. Okay, and so the land is not going to be quite as productive because it's being pressured. I was mentioning this earlier that the majority of goods that were produced in New Spain are going to be sold there and remain there in New Spain. You don't have a very large export economy in New Spain, right? Yes, there are several goods that are being exported from the colony, which we mentioned earlier, but the majority of goods that are being produced are for domestic use, okay? So you don't have a big export economy, which would have helped the economy of New Spain to grow. And finally, another thing that is limiting the economic growth of New Spain during the Bourbon reforms are royal monopolies. Okay, and so when you have a royal monopoly, that means that the royal government controls everything in that particular industry. Okay, so you have royal monopolies on tobacco, which you see here. I have some tobacco and pulque, right here, the alcoholic beverage. And so the royal government is going to control and profit from the sale of tobacco and pulque. There's actually going to be a tax on pulque, right? And so this is a problem because it's eliminating private businessmen from being involved in profiting from those industries. Okay, you could have had local elites there in New Spain being involved in the tobacco industry, right, owning tobacco plantations, making money off of this, and that money that they made would have remained heavily in the economy of New Spain. But since these private businessmen cannot get involved in industries like tobacco because of the royal monopoly, that means they cannot make a profit off of it. And those funds are not going to remain in New Spain. No, those funds, those profits that come from the tobacco industry are going back to the mother country back in Europe. So royal monopolies are going to also limit economic growth in New Spain during the Bourbon reforms. So ultimately, looking back, were the Bourbon reforms a success or were they a failure? Well, you can argue both ways, right? Because there were mixed results. On one hand, yes, you have increased production, right? In general, right? On a number of areas, you have the increased silver exports, but in other areas of the economy, you also see increased production. And so ultimately, that's good, right? You've seen increases in trade. Because of the new policy allowing colonies to trade with each other. That's another success, right? Because the Spanish crown is pulling profits off of that increased production of goods. The Spanish crown is profiting off of the silver exports because more is being exported from New Spain back to the mother country, right? They're profiting from the trade because they're taxing the trade. You see increases in population, all right? And so that is also mixed results, because with the increases in population, you have more pressure on the land, and the land is going to become less productive, right? So that's kind of a problem. That's more of a failure, right? You see a decrease in wages during the time of the Bourbon reforms. That is going to be a failure, because it hurts the local economy of New Spain, because more and more people don't have the money to pay for goods whose prices are increasing. The monopolies that are instituted during the Bourbon reforms are going to be a problem. They bring in more money for Spain. Yeah, that's great. The royal government's making money off of the monopolies, but it deprives wealth from the local economy, because local businessmen are not able to participate in those industries where the monopolies exist. And another problem, another failure of the Bourbon reforms is going to be the resentment from the Creoles towards the Peninsulares, right? The Creoles are going to be very upset that the Peninsulares are taking over the high government positions, such as the position of intendant, right? And the intendants have so much power and authority, prestige, and are making a good salary. The Creoles resent that, because they wanted to have those positions. They used to have those positions. And so those are taken away from them, because the Peninsulares are seen as more loyal to the Spanish crown. Right? So you have a number of successes and failures taking place during the Bourbon reforms. Ultimately, a lot of the profits that are gained by the Spanish government during the Bourbon reforms are going to be used for the Spanish military, because Spain goes through a number of wars during that time period. And so those profits are not really being put back into the economy, they're being put into the military. So you can see that as one of the ultimate failures of the Bourbon reforms. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me, and I will get back to you.